Let's not beat around the bush. There are many aspects of the Xiaomi 12T that are identical to the Xiaomi 12T Pro. However, the biggest differences between these two phones and the most important part is the camera sensor, the main camera sensor, and also the chipset. The latter of which is the more interesting one, so we'll put near the end of this video. So why should you pick one over the other? Remember, there is a humongous price gap between the 12T and the 12T Pro. So let's go through our usual 6 points and compare both of these phones. I want to start off by telling you guys that I know many of you guys are just looking at the spec sheets on GSM Arena. And if you look at GSM Arena alone, then the Xiaomi 12T Pro is obviously gonna be better. And no, a phone is more than just the specs itself. Also, GSM Arena is not 100% accurate, so those specs are most likely just provided by the manufacturer and they just copied them and pasted it into their database for us to see. Don't get me wrong, GSM Arena is handy, but they are definitely not always accurate. So why do I bring this up? Well, technically, if we just look at the specs alone for both the 12T and the 12T Pro, the dimensions are identical. Technically, depending on where you measure, they are not exactly identical because the main camera of the Xiaomi 12T doesn't have that prominent double bump like the 12T Pro, so the thickness is definitely not identical. The design, however, is something that GSM Arena cannot list out, but I can describe to you that these two phones look 100% identical. The design language, the exact same colors and matte finish, it's all the same. However, there is one difference, which is on the camera bump. So the 12T Pro prints 200 megapixel and this one prints 108 megapixel. This is a rather straightforward one because both the 12T and 12T Pro are using the exact same screen, which features Xiaomi's new Crystal Res branding. They are both AMOLED screens with a higher resolution of 2712 by 1220 pixels and has a 120Hz refresh rate. The color accuracy is also pretty much identical between the 12T and the 12T Pro. So yeah, they're great, so no complaints overall in terms of the display quality. However, going back to GSM Arena's spec list, I think that there's something that the specs police really like to get riled up about, and that is the peak brightness value. So listed in GSM Arena, it says 900 nits peak brightness. Yes, that is something that we cannot measure because peak brightness is mostly something that they only are able to measure in a very specific situation, and they use it in marketing materials all over the place. With that said, what we have measured is actually the 500 nits of typical brightness. That is accurate, and our colorimeter also reports about 500 nits of maximum brightness. I think that smartphone brands, spec lists and sites like GSM Arena could have done better to help users understand what is the true brightness level that we are going to see with our own two eyes. And then comes the software. The software remains the same, so just watch out our review for the Xiaomi 12T Pro at the top right corner there. In summary, it's still the same MIUI and there's still a lot of weird bugs and annoyances everywhere. For the battery life, surprisingly, that 5000 mAh battery in the 12T will get us quite a long battery life when we tested using PCMark battery life tests. It is also pretty much comparable with the 12T Pro, but the idle times of the 12T and that Dimensity 8100 Ultra is not as good as the Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1 on the 12T Pro. As for the charging time, we did the same 3 charging tests like what we did on the 12T Pro on the 12T. First, we used the stock 120 watts charger and we just leave it all in default settings with the boost charging mode turned off, and it takes about 35 minutes to charge from 0 to 100%. Pretty standard. Then we headed into the settings menu, enabled the boost charging mode, and then we managed to charge from 0 to 100 in about 20 minutes, which is fantastic, but nothing out of the ordinary. Finally, we use our Ugreen 100 watts GaN charger, and this is the exact 100 watts GaN charger we used on the 12T Pro's test. Surprisingly, it charges at 45 watts for the 12T, and that means the 12T supports 45 watts of USB PD, and that is very surprising. So I don't really know who actually controls the charging speed. It could be Xiaomi themselves or the chipset maker. And in this case, I think it is due to MediaTek supporting 45 watts of USB PD via their charging port. And that also means the Xiaomi 12T's fast charging compatibility is better than the 12T Pro. Okay, cameras. Now this is a weird one. The biggest difference between these two phones is obviously the main sensor. So the 12T is using 108 megapixel, and we've seen it many times in the past actually, and it only captures images in either 12 megapixels or 108 megapixels. There are no intermediate 50 megapixels or anything else, so it's only those two. The picture quality coming out of this phone is fairly okay overall. I mean, I wasn't expecting it to be mind-blowing, but it is decent. Capturing images at 108 megapixels though, it shows that the picture quality isn't exactly the best, as it is rather blurry. And this mostly boils down to how the software and how it post-processes the image. And comparing it with the 200 megapixel shot on the 12T Pro at 50% scale, which equates to somewhere around 108 megapixels, yeah, the 12T Pro is looking a lot better. Night shots also show a much bigger difference, as the 12T Pro sensor managed to capture a brighter and clearer image at night compared to 12T, which looks very dark. Quack quack. And since the chipset is different between these two phones, the ISP or the image signal processor is also different, and hence the end product of these two phones' pictures will look different. It's like asking a group of people to raise up one of their hands. Some people will raise their left hand, some will raise their right, some will raise with a clenched fist, some will raise it like with an open palm, some with a lot of energy, some with a limpy hand, but they all raise their hands differently. So this kind of analogy kind of applies to ISPs as well, because they all process your image, but they all process in a very different way. So the 12T shot also looks rather warmer compared to the 12T Pro in terms of its color temperature. And since the ISP is different, the video capabilities are also affected. You see, the 12T only manages to capture up to 1080p 60 fps or 4K 30 fps. There is no 8K option, and the footage, although it is stable thanks to hardware OIS, it had problems because you can see in this footage here, it keeps focus seeking, which makes it very nauseating to watch. And then one of the main highlights that MediaTek makes is the ultra night video capabilities, and I filmed this video at night when it was raining heavily outside. And the 12T's video obviously looks better than the 12T Pro. And they are both filming at 1080p 60 fps by the way. So in this regard, yes, MediaTek got it right in terms of the ultra night video. It is clearly better, but as for how much, that's up for you to judge. Now let's talk about the performance then. The 12T is using the MediaTek Dimensity 8100 Ultra, and I think in our mind we will think that since it is Ultra, that means it is better than the base version of the MediaTek 8100, right? In reality, no, it isn't. The 8100 Ultra is the same 8100 in terms of hardware, but it is slightly tuned in terms of software to make it different, and hence they can add the name Ultra at the end there. We will have yet another video talking about what the Ultra means in another video. However, the 12T is still a very competent chipset, and when it comes to gaming, as shown in our gaming test, the chipset wouldn't get us a consistent frame rate while playing Genshin Impact at the highest graphical setting. It fluctuates from about 35 to 50 FPS, but it can be improved when we enable performance mode. Granted, we should be getting consistent 60 FPS if we play the game in medium graphical settings instead. Oh, this 12T, just like the 12T Pro, still uses USB 2.0, so it doesn't have HDMI output as well, and there's also no micro SD card slot. And that leads us to the price. The 12T is at 1,999 ringgit, and I would say that the 12T offers great value for those who just want to play games on their phones, and it also offers great performance. While it's not the best, it is actually good enough for a lot of use cases. The inclusion of a proper OIS system also makes the price tag even more appealing, and you can take some very good looking pictures and videos using this phone. So as a whole package, the 12T is actually fantastic. Compared with the 12T Pro starting price of 2,699, the price gap of 700 ringgit becomes the highlight. If you shell out that extra 700 ringgit, then you're gonna get a better camera for night shots, better performance for those who want to push their device to the limit, but that's about it. Whether or not that extra 700 ringgit is worth it, that is up for you to how you use your device. Just don't buy the 12 gigs of RAM version because 8 gigs of RAM is clearly enough, so you can watch out our other video at the top right corner there, or at the end screen here where we talk about the RAM and why 8 gigs is technically the sweet spot. And that's it. If you want to get either of these phones, do let me know down in the comment section below which one you would actually choose. That's it. We'll see you guys in the next video.